Hi all, I wanted to put this video together for you guys just to share with you some of the thoughts that I'm having as I prepare for a travel course to South Africa. The broad objective of this course is to immerse ourselves in the ecology of South Africa. Simple definition here is a reminder that ecology is the scientific study of the interactions between organisms and their environment. And then environment piece includes both the living factors that make up an organism's environment. So maybe it's predators, it's prey, it's competitors, as well as the non-living components, things like the temperature and the moisture levels and the soil nutrient concentrations that also play a really critical role in defining that organism's environment. I want to remind you or share with you that there's different levels at which we can study a system. So the smallest unit of study is the individual, and then we can kind of zoom out and include more and more components of that system. We can go from individual up to population, all the way up to ecosystem ecology. I wanted to give you some example questions that you encounter at each of these different levels of ecology. So autoecology is really focusing on the species or the individual. Like, so you look at an individual and what is that species? What morphological, physiological, or behavioral characteristics does it have that makes us know it's that species? So in terms of applying this, we're going to be looking at a lot of tracks and thinking about what species left this. What adaptations does this species have that reflect its role in this environment? Moving up to population ecology, where we're thinking about not just one individual, but all the individuals of that particular species, how many there are, ratio of male to female, is the population growing or shrinking? Is this a rare species or a common species? This is one place where we might lean pretty heavily on Lee and Kiersey to give us some context for what's kind of normal. Community ecology then embraces also that not just one species, but all the species that are living in that particular place. So just getting a list of the species that you see in a place is community ecology, and then thinking about how diverse it is and maybe why is this assemblage here and we see a different set of species in a new place, what factors are driving that. One thing I want to highlight is the role of disturbance is particularly important in the systems that we're going to be going to. So thinking about particularly fire, which is kind of exciting to me. Ecosystem ecology is that the highest hierarchical level. In this, we're also really looking at the flows of energy and matter between components of that system. So maybe something like, how does the amount of rainfall and temperature affect the amount of biomass in the system, or decomposition rates and how that influences ultimately biomass as well. It might seem like a lot of questions, but I want to remind you that we have three main focus areas for the course. The first and most prominent is tracking and trailing. I've really come to appreciate tracking as a tool that offers us to just see more, really opening the door to knowing so much more about what's happening in a system. Any or all of the questions on the previous slide may come up while we're engaging in tracking, and many more, I imagine. I have biogeography in quotes here to just clarify what we mean a little bit. So biogeography is the study of the distribution of species around the world, but it's also about studying the connections and relationships among species globally. John gave a really great example of this in his mammals video when he was talking about the Smith squirrel. Even without having ever stepped a foot on the African continent, you can look at this species and be fairly confident that it's a squirrel, but also knowing that it looks a little different. So we'll constantly be exploring what knowledge we carry with us from our known systems and how that is either being challenged or maybe enriched by the new observations we make around us. The final learning objective that John and I have is thinking like a scientist. Thinking like a scientist involves the scientific method. You've probably seen some version of this since you were a kid. I like this version because it's simplicity, but it is lacking some things. For example, it makes it look like the scientific method is very linear, that you collect an observation and you march through these steps until you get right to a conclusion. In reality, the process is very circular. So maybe you'll get to leading up to an experiment and that'll lead to new observations, and then that'll lead to new questions, and then that'll lead to new hypotheses. So there's this constant reiteration of new questions and new observations that you kind of keep coming back to and maybe taking you in different directions, but always with exciting new insights. What I do want to emphasize with this diagram, though, is the first two steps. And those, I think, are the ones that we're going to focus most on our journey. And I would argue that they're most crucial to being a good scientist. And that's first and foremost making detailed observations. And then on top of that, and from that, actually, having that sense of wonder, having questions. And I'm really looking forward to these questions just kind of flowing in abundance. I can't wait to hear your questions and learn from them. We'll also then be asking questions about how we could test our questions. What field methods could we use to kind of find out some answers about that? I'm also super excited to hear and get kind of a little glimpse into what Lee and Kiersey and their guests do for research and how they investigate their questions. Those ideas in mind, I start from a place of maps. I'm kind of a map geek. It really helps me orient myself to a new place. So here, just kind of a broad overview. We're going to be flying into Johannesburg, which is just south of Pretoria, and taking that 5-hour shuttle right away up to Nagala Camp. So maybe showing you a bunch of maps, and in all of them, Nagala Camp is that red dot there. A couple of things to notice from this picture. We are pretty close to the border of Zimbabwe and Mozambique, and also East Swatini is also right kind of to the south of us. Understanding of the ecology of an area, I often start with the abiotic factors. And climate is a really big one because it's the driver of biome distribution across the planet. It's the biggest influence on kind of what plants and animals are going to be in a particular place and time. So here I have for you the mean annual temperature globally, just to give you perspective of thinking again about the biogeography questions about what is this like, what we know, and how is it different. So I do have additional red dot in there. That's probably Johannesburg Airport. And then the one that is farther to the northeast is Nagala Camp. You can see that we're in that light orange and dark orange colors, putting us in a mean annual temperature of between about 60 and 77 degrees Fahrenheit, and that is about 15 to 25 degrees Celsius. What can we compare that to what we know? Well, we look over on the US continent, North America, and we see Florida is about in the similar mean annual temperature. In terms of precipitation, we're mostly in that yellowish color, which is greater than 500 to 750 millimeters per year. Again, kind of going back to see what we know, that's quite a bit less than what we have, although there is some, so we're kind of in that light blue-green. There is some areas near where we're going to be in Nagala Camp that's going to a similar amount of rainfall over the course of a year. Now, there it's going to be much more seasonal. They have a distinct rainy season and dry season. We are going to be there during the dry season. But so just in general, I'm kind of thinking about it being quite a bit drier. Close to us, to get that dry, we pretty much have to go up into northern Canada, which is kind of an interesting contrast, right? As warm as Florida, but as dry as northern Canada. So it's kind of a mind shift from what we might be thinking about. The reasons getting that basic information of average mean annual temperature and average amount of rainfall that falls a year can be really helpful is it really pinpoints us on what type of biome we are in. Biomes are very broad classification terms that can be used globally to represent different systems. So you'll see temperate deciduous forest, temperate seasonal forest is the type of biome that we live in, and we can find that in Europe, we can find that in Asia. So it's a very broad category, not specifying particular species that you'll find there, but types of species that you'll find there. And with that combination of mean annual temperature and precipitation, that lands us right in kind of the lower portion of this tropical seasonal forest savanna biome. So we're at about 20 to 25 mean annual temperature, and we're about 50 to 100 centimeters of rainfall annually. So a Cool seasonal forest or savanna is essentially a mixed woodland, grassland type of biome. It's dominated by grasses with scattered trees, and it's host to many species of grazers and browsers and their predators. The system that we're in essentially is like the classic example type of a savanna. But there's flavors of savanna, so as we dive a little bit deeper, we'll kind of see the different types of savanna that we will be in. Okay, another kind of just close up, kind of get our grounding here map of where you're going to be. The locator map I have in the corner here is just showing us that that area that we're in. The highlighted in red is the province we're in. We're going to be in the Mpumalanga province of South Africa, very close to the Limpopo province in South Africa. Just a couple things about the Mpumalanga province. Its name literally means the place where the sun rises. So it is one of the easternmost provinces in South Africa. Just look at that same thing with an aerial image instead. Love looking at aerial images because we can really kind of just get a good sense of kind of what's going on. So remember, again, we are flying into Johannesburg. And it looks like there's this main road that comes up north. I think we're probably going to be taking that once we arrive at the airport. And actually going a little bit north of Ngala Camp, because you'll notice all this green in the middle. That is a pretty big mountain chain. It's called the Drakensberg Escarpment. And the other interesting thing about that, it's certainly influencing regional climate conditions. So in addition to climate, another big factor that influences the distribution of species is topography. And we can see that here. We can see how that's going to really influence the vegetation. It's much greener here, and that is changing temperature and it's changing precipitation in that area. So here, let's take a look at how those climate differences vary over that kind of specific area that we're going to be in. So again, I have Johannesburg Airport highlighted. You can see there the mean annual temperature is between 15 to 20 degrees Celsius. So that's about 60 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. You have that Drakensberg Escarpment getting a little bit colder because as you go up in elevation, temperatures are colder. And then kind of coming to the north side of that, the northeast side of it, where we are going to be. Hoedensvruit is kind of a close city to where we are in here in the Ngala Camp, where we'll be spending most of our time when we're in South Africa. All of that is getting, has a temperature about between 68 and 77 degrees Fahrenheit over the course of the year. Also, I forgot to mention in these maps, I have highlighted here Kruger National Park, which will be right up against, and also these game reserves. This game reserve, we will be spending a few days, about 4 days in that location. Annual rainfall, you can see, is even more complex. And again, this I just get excited about this stuff because these really big gradients in climate leads to differences in species. So it's pretty cool that we have this much transition in the amount of annual rainfall in this area over a pretty short difference. So in Johannesburg, the mean annual rainfall is kind of mostly in that yellow. So that's over 500 millimeters to 700 millimeters. And then you can see how this mountain chain influences rainfall in that area, going up to where the green is, which is about 750 to 100 millimeters of rainfall a year. And then that blue greater than 1,000 up to 15, greater than 1,000 and then up to 1,500 millimeters of rainfall. That's close to the amount of rainfall that we receive in the Northeast. So that is pretty neat to have that transition. And then where we are in Ngala Camp, we're down in that orange, which is much drier, almost close to desert dry conditions. So pretty fascinating, like that amount of transition in rainfall in such a close area. And then again, the big question, how does that influence life and the life that we're going to see on the ground? It might be neat to also look at the mean August temperature for the month that we're actually on the ground. So Ngala Camp and Hoedensvruit, pretty much that whole that area next to Kruger National Park is where we'll be during our stay. Mean annual temperature is between 60 essentially and 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Now remember that there's not a lot of moisture in this system. So if there's more water in a system, it lessens the degree that the temperature changes. It kind of modulates the temperature because water has a high heat capacity. So in more arid climates, temperature changes much more dramatically between night and day. And we'll see that on the ground. So I've been checking and kind of following temperature on Huddersfield for the past couple weeks. And temperatures will be up in the 80s during the day, and then they'll drop really pretty cold at night down into the kind of mid 50s. So good to keep in mind while you're climate and the topography play a really important role in driving what type of species you'll see in an area. So ecologists have used this concept of ecoregion to kind of mesh those two concepts together to give us these ideas of ecoregions. I wanted to first show you a map of ecoregions that would be familiar to you so you get acquainted with the concept. So we're kind of right in here. We're part of the Great Lakes ecoregion. Right below us is the High Allegheny Plateau ecoregion. Here we have essentially, outlining the Adirondacks, which is part of the Northern Appalachian Acadian ecoregion, which you can see also kind of leaps over here and extends from, through Vermont, New Hampshire, up into Maine and Canada. So these are, you can imagine with the names of these ecoregions and maybe kind of experiencing being in them, the different types of species you find in these ecoregions. They have kind of a distinctly different flavor to them. Let's see how this climate and topography maps that we've been kind of looking at play into the different ecoregions that we find in South Africa. So here's an ecoregion map of South Africa. And again, orientate yourself that we're flying into Johannesburg and traveling up here and spending much of our time in Ngala Camp. But the whole time we're going to be in Africa, we're going to be in what is designated in this yellow color as the low veld ecoregion. On this map, I'd just like you to appreciate on that journey, we're going to travel through a bunch of different ecoregions from Johannesburg airport up to our camp, which is really cool. I don't think I've ever been more excited about a 5-hour bus ride in my life. It's going to be really neat to see those different systems. So I thought I'd highlight a little bit the specific ecoregions that we're going to be in and get us a little bit acquainted with some of these different terms that we might hear. So in general, what veld means, you'll see a lot of these ecoregions have the term veld in them: bush veld, bankenveld, high veld, low veld. What they refer to is really just a rural open landscape. So it's almost like a synonym for savanna. You'll also notice that I'm hoping that we get a good glimpse of these northern escarpment mountains. So that is that biome that's represented in this teal color, which I think we'll be kind of skirting around to get to Ngala Camp. The bushveld refers to a woodland, a savanna system that is definitely more burgeoning on a woodland meaning dominated by shrubs. You still have that open grassland shrub component that characterizes this as a type of savanna, but certainly definitely quite a bit more dominated by shrubs. And that is kind of this whole central area that we'll be driving you through from Johannesburg. Then we have the western and eastern Bankenveld. From what I understand, the Bankenveld is more of a mix, kind of the more mixed grassland, shrubland, where the velds, the high velds and the low velds, are both more dominated by grasses. So kind of pushing that spectrum a little bit farther more towards grasses. And I gathered that the low veld is a bit drier than the high veld. Obviously, a little difference in elevation as well as the name. All right, zooming in here just to get a little bit closer here. So here we are in Ngala Camp. Again, it's right on the border between these two provinces. So to the north, we have the Limpopo province, and to the south, we have the Mpumalanga province, and pretty darn close to the Kruger National Park. And we have the Oliphant River running right in front of our camp, and the 2 game reserves right adjacent to the park that we'll spend some time in. Just zooming in again, looking at them from where the ecoregions are. Again, I really think we're primarily going to be in that low veld type system throughout our stay in South Africa. And just looking, same area at that aerial image, just getting a sense of how the landscape is changing. I am a little bit intrigued by this right here. I think that's probably a mining operation. From what I've read, mining is a very common use of land use in the area. There's coal, there's also some mining for gems, minerals as well. So that's kind of an interesting thing to add into the mix of our questions and how that plays a role in the ecosystem. This is a little bit more specific. So we talked about ecoregions. This is a data layer that I found that is actually a vegetation community map. So it's different from an ecoregion and a vegetation community map is they're specifically referencing the dominant plants that you're finding in a region. So where we are is in the low-veld rugged Mopan belt. The Mopan plant is one of the most common plants that we'll see there. And a little bit of a segue here to the next video that I hope to put together for you about the common plants that we'll see on our journey as well. So I think I'll kind of just leave it as that segue into the next video that I'll be working on just some of the common plants, because each of the names of these plants refer to some of the each of the names of these vegetation communities refers to some of the common plants that we will be seeing on our travels. And of course, always think about who's eating those plants, and that we'll find different species depending on the different plants that we find. Just to wrap up, just want to leave you with a bird's eye view of Ngala Camp. I love looking at this image. It always gets me so excited to actually put my feet on the ground. Here's the Oliphant River right here. You can almost in this image see our tents. I'm really intrigued by this kind of tributary coming in here that is definitely got a variation in vegetation, right? It looks like with that water, we're getting more wooded area. And kind of these patches of more open grassland with scattered shrubs. So, man, I'm excited, and I can't wait to see what this looks like on the ground and see it with you. Okay.